Hi, this is Eliza Inkberry with Darkside University's Gothic Gardening course. I am talking today about wildlife gardening, and this is kind of a spin-off of a student-requested video on bats and attracting them to the garden, and I am going to talk about that in a lot of detail, but I decided to use some bits from a PowerPoint that I do on creating a wildlife garden when I'm teaching to students locally. And so I'm just going to kind of skip around because this is a 2-hour presentation and I don't think I want to talk for that long on video, but I'm going to hit some highlights, and the one I wanted to start with is monarchs because I think that they are the best example of why we need to be trying to attract wildlife to our garden. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to attract wildlife to the garden, and one of the main reasons is that it can fix the problems in your garden. If you have a really healthy soil ecosystem, which means that you have a lot of organic matter added to the soil, you're adding thick amounts of mulch every year. And I really mean a lot of mulch when I say that. I think people just do not put a lot. They'll put like 2 inches or so. Right now I don't have enough in my front yard, and I can really tell the difference in the soil quality. I really need to get that up to about 6 to 8 inches, and right now it's at only about an inch deep of wood chips, and the soil is drying out a lot more than it was. It's just not doing as well as far as the soil ecology. I can tell that there's not as much breaking down. There should be like a thin layer of compost in between the mulch and the soil, like the geological soil layer, so like your clay or your sand or whatever kind of eroded rock particles you have. There should be kind of a layer of naturally made compost where your earthworms and fungi and bacteria and stuff are breaking that mulch that you've added down. And then you kind of see this really soft, moist layer right there that's very healthy and rich, and it's getting churned into the soil by your soil organisms. And I'm getting to where I really miss that when it's not there, because I can tell that I'm watering more often. I can tell that the plants in those spots are less healthy. And I have spots in my yard where the soil is exactly the way I want it. The mulch is thick, the ecosystem in the soil is doing really well, and I can tell that those plants are a lot healthier. But the other thing is that all of the ecosystem in your garden starts at the smallest layer. So, the the organisms that are slightly larger than the bacteria and the fungi are going to eat those. And then the slightly larger organisms than that are going to eat those. And so on up the chain till you get to humans and whales or whatever you want to put at the top of the chain. I don't know that. I think that just large predators could be just a general category there. But once you have the soil in place, and you're adding a lot of plants that are there for beneficial insect attracting. So plants with small flowers, umbel type flowers like carrots, which is also Queen Anne's lace, composite flowers that are in the daisy family, which means there's a lot of tiny flowers in the center, and then there's petals all around the outside to attract it. So like a sunflower is a composite flower, asters and so on. Those kind of flowers attract beneficial insects to the garden. And once you have those, you stop seeing disease problems. Like I've had probably hundreds of white cabbage butterflies landing all over my brassicas all spring long. It's been almost 3 months now that I've been seeing them, and they're landing on everything, and I watch them laying eggs. And so at first I was thinking, oh great, this is going to be a pain because I'm growing so many brassicas, I must just have a lot of these things. But then I started seeing wasp all over the plants and ladybugs all over the plants, and the ladybugs won't eat the caterpillars usually unless they're very tiny, but the ladybugs eat the eggs right after right after the butterflies lay them. And the ones that they miss, the wasps show up and they look for them, and if they find one, then they let all the other wasps in the nest know, and they all come and they get them. But then you have like all these insects living in your garden, and that attracts the next step up, which in a lot of cases is things like bats. That a lot of us are interested in having around because they take care of some of the insects that we don't necessarily want in the garden, and they're also just really cool animals. Um, so it's important to have everything from the ground up. And I mentioned that especially because I have a cousin who was talking about how he wanted to know how to kill everything in his yard. And so he figured he ought to start with the insects because if he killed all the insects, then there wouldn't be anything else in his yard. And he's correct. It sounds like a horrible yard to me, but he's correct. And I think that, when people are talking about wildlife gardening, they think about, I'm going to build this house or I'm going to make this large, you know, feeder or something. And those things attract animals, but the way to really get them to come and live there is to build an ecosystem. And so I wanted to talk about that up front, and also to talk about in the context of monarchs, where we've destroyed ecosystems to the point that they can't, their patterns have been disrupted. They'll probably survive locally in places that are warm all year, but they're one of the most amazing insects because they have about 5 generations that travel from Mexico to Canada, or from like Florida to the New England area, depending on where they are. I think there's another base kind of below California, and then they go up into the Seattle area, and then they go back south. And so what happens is the first generation makes it, say, as far as Texas, and then they lay their eggs on milkweed that they find in Texas. And I'm just kind of generalizing. I don't know exactly where the first generation makes it to, but those intrepid first generation butterflies who came from Mexico and have actually seen Mexico die after they lay their eggs, they run out of energy, or they get eaten, or they basically die after completing this stage of their life. And those caterpillars eat milkweed, and then they fly north. And those butterflies have never been to Mexico, but they lay their eggs in, say, South Carolina, where I live. And then those eat milkweed and they go forward, they go north, and so on. And so you have the next generation eating in, say, Kentucky, and then the next one eating even further north than that. And then they get to Canada and they're like, hey, I think it's getting cold and I'm going to go to Mexico. And so they start going back again. But nobody really knows exactly how they know to do that, but they do. And the problem is we've lost so much of the ecosystem that, and by ecosystem, I basically mean we're adding all of this monocropped agriculture. And what we're doing is we are spraying it generally because we've developed these Roundup ready, or pesticide ready crops, and that makes it so farmers can spray as much of these chemicals as they want, and then it wipes out all of the milkweed because they don't want anything mixed in there that's not the actual plants. Whereas before, farmers would have a pretty good rate of keeping weeds down by doing their spring tilling. And, it's still a monocrop and it's still kind of damaging to the system, but it wasn't as damaging because some weeds would get by. And so the butterflies were able to find things to lay their eggs on and keep going. But now it's basically a food desert for them, and they don't make it very far, or the ones that do don't lay as many eggs, and because they don't have as much energy because they haven't eaten as much. It's a very stark example of what happens when we don't have an ecosystem. But if you think about American suburbs, or suburbs anywhere, because I know a lot of you are global, and I think that pretty much anywhere that you have an affluent society, you have a lot of lawns, because lawns were a symbol of wealth. Basically, you were flaunting the fact that you did not need to plant that land in crops. You could afford to hire servants to scythe the lawn to be just this uh, beautiful, sweeping, you know, vista of green. And and there's other theories as to why we like lawns, like the savannah days when prairie hunting and that sort of thing. But originally, it became a symbol of wealth. And the house on the hill, the big mansion, had this lawn. And so once everybody was able to afford a lawn, they all had a lawn. And then originally lawns were actually sold with clover and dandelion seeds mixed in. And that's, and maybe some other stuff, things that survived really well throughout the season. And so they would mow that, and it would have, some flowers in it and stuff. So it wasn't a total monoculture, and there were things that insects could live on there. And then we developed these chemicals after World War II, or during, and then we used them on lawns after World War II, that they discovered that some of them would kill what are called monocots, which is plants that come up with one seed leaf, like grass and corn. And oh, I just said that totally backwards. They discovered that they would kill dicots, which are the ones that come up with two seed leaves. And so that includes, like, if you think about a bean seed, that's a really classic dicot. It comes up, it's got two huge seed leaves, the first two leaves that pop out. And dicot stands for dicotyledon, a monocot, monocotyledon. But they basically decided to have this heavy marketing campaign to let everyone know that, man, our dicots ugly, and you should definitely spray this chemical on your lawn to kill them. Um, it was very effective. So I like that this is a Gothic gardening class, and that Goths already kind of rethink the way society does things, and look at things through another lens. And so this is a subject that really fascinates me, that everybody just kind of bought into this, and now you're kind of a bad neighbor if you don't have a good lawn. And definitely if you have dandelions in it, that's terrible. So in general, I like for my classes to really, like, I like to talk about, you know, the sterility of our landscape and how we can bring that back to and really it's helpful to us, because again, you don't end up with all the pests and diseases. The soil takes care of a lot of the diseases. The insects take care of each other. It's a pretty good system. So I guess I'll switch to this slide, which illustrates what I'm talking about here. This is an old ad from I think the 60s, and I've seen in older gardening books. I've picked up a couple at thrift stores that talk about how you need to spray chemicals to kill your unsightly earthworms, because you don't want to have earthworms in your yard, because that means your yard is dirty, I guess. Um, so we have these kind of outdated things, and I think some of it we just haven't caught up to yet. I bet in 20 years a lot of the stuff that we're doing regularly right now will look so archaic to us. So it's just something to keep in mind. So the nice thing is that it's pretty simple to figure out what wildlife needs in your garden. Any wildlife is going to need water. Um, so having some sort of water source in your yard is going to be key to having a good wildlife support system. So even if it's just a little bowl that you put maybe one of those solar discs in that creates a constant water flow. They make just, I think they're even less than $30. They're just these discs that you buy that float on the surface. You can put them in a bird bath, you can put them in a bowl of water, a cauldron, whatever you happen to have that you want to have water bubbling in. And it will make it so the water is moving and mosquitoes don't lay eggs in moving water. Um, so that's, a very simple source. Or you could have a pond, or you could have a stream, or, whatever you are able to have in your yard. There's a plant called a cup plant, which I think is Silphium perfoliatum, and it's got these little receptacles up next to the stem where the leaves connect, and the water collects there, and insects can drink out of that. And it's actually a good source for if you're just not able to keep up with keeping your water source available in your yard. So water, definitely number one thing. Thing is, I'll just include food and shelter together, because what you're going to end up doing is going, okay, I want fruit bats in my yard, which, I don't have the option to have fruit bats in my yard where I live. But if you live somewhere and that's the animal that you're interested in attracting, then you look up what does it eat and where does it live in the wild. And then you provide those two things. So any animal that you are interested in attracting to your yard, you just look up what it likes in the wild, and then you create that in your yard. And you can even look also on Google to see if anyone else has already made houses for those things, because then you can just use their do-it-yourself plans and not have to reinvent the wheel. But it's very easy to kind of animal to come to your yard if you know what it likes. So this is an example that I like to use. This is near my house. There's a nature park called Lake Conisty, and we found this snake impaled on a rose that had been eaten, and you could see its rib cage, and everything was visible, and you could tell that something had picked the meat out between all the bones. And it's a butcher bird, or a shrike. We have loggerhead shrikes where I live, and they need thorny shrubs. So blackberries, black locust, roses, anything that's got a thorn on it, and they're going to hang up their kill and then pick all the meat out of it. And that's why they got called a butcher bird. So, if that's an animal that you were interested in, then you would know that you needed water, and you needed to plant a something that has thorns on it, and then you need to encourage wildlife, like from the ground up, so good soil, ecosystem of insects, and then you're going to end up with like small snakes like this brown snake. And by that I mean it's called a brown snake. It's a kind of terrible name because there's so many brown snakes. I'm not referring to its color though. Anyway, so anything you want to, you look up what kind of habitat it likes. I'm not looking at this one. So let's see. 16. Forgot I wasn't going in order. So plants for an ecosystem, any native fruiting plant in your area is going to attract some sort of wildlife most of the time. I will say that we're growing pawpaws, which are native here, and I never see anything on those. I wonder how old they are, and if the insects that or other wildlife that kind of adapted with them is mostly gone, or if they just have diminished numbers because there aren't enough pawpaws around. So it's kind of like you're in this island when you plant a pawpaw, because there's not one in the near vicinity. So whatever insect it is isn't hopping from place to place to find it. I do know that zebra swallowtail butterflies will lay eggs and eat the leaves of it, but I never see it get pollinated very well. It's really hard to attract the pollinators for it. But this is a tangent. For the most part, any native plant for your area is a good choice, especially if it has flowers with small nectaries. This is more of a tubular nectary, and it's a lantana, and that's more of an attractor for like butterflies. So if it's got a tube shape, then you're thinking longer mouth parts, usually butterflies or moths. This mountain mint is a native plant, and it's got tiny little nectaries on the flowers, so you're going to get a lot of the parasitic wasp and things like that. So bushy or tall plants for nest. I think black locust is always a good option because it's a soil improver, and it's a good nectary plant, and it has other uses as well. Viburnums are great. They are a huge attractor for birds. Hollies, again, birds, and both of those for insects too. And tulip trees I recommend in my area, which is often called a tulip poplar, but it's actually kind of in the magnolia family. It's also called yellow poplar, but it's not a poplar. But if you look at the flowers, you can see kind of the magnolia resemblance, and they're referred to as a tulip tree either because the flower looks like a tulip or because if you turn the leaf upright, it looks like a tulip, depending on who you ask. But the flowers on that have huge nectar production, and it's the major honey plant in this area for bees. So another thing to do is to think about the full season. So if you've got something that's going to need to overwinter, especially if you're doing insects, because if you chop up all of your garden debris and throw that out every year, that's usually where your insects are overwintering. So you're throwing out all of your beneficial predators that you've been building up all year. You're going to have to start from scratch next year because you just shipped them all off to the landfill or burn them or however you get rid of your yard waste. And then, some debris in your yard is good for things to overwinter in. If you don't have anything, then the animals don't have a place to shelter. I wanted to mention the edge effect, which is the fact that anytime two edges connect to each other, you have the greatest biodiversity in that area. Because say if you have a field, like a meadow, right next to a forest, then that in that corridor that's kind of overlapping between the two edges, you're going to have meadow animals going into the forest, and you're going to have forest animals coming out into the meadow. So creating edge gives you more of an environment, and this is called a fedge right here, which is a food hedge, and it's right on the edge of this property, and so this area right here could, especially this person's driveway and lawn, so it could definitely be a better ecosystem. But this open area might be an area that would be good for, say, a bluebird house because they like open areas to be able to see, but then they could fly in here and get twigs for nesting material, and they could get insects, and they could find water source and things like that, so they could go back and forth. And this is an owl that actually landed in a tree above my mom and daughter and I when we were at Disney World a long time ago during the fireworks show over the Cinderella Castle. And I had felt like that place was so artificial and strange, and then this happened, and it kind of blew my mind. This owl had obviously adapted to living at Disney World because it didn't seem the least bit phased by all the fireworks. It was just sitting there. So, a lot of times I hear people talking about they only want to plant native plants in their yard, and I'm actually going to do a video just on that. But I like for people to think about, or just to make a list, what do you eat? Um, do you only eat native plants? And if you only eat native plants, that's amazing, and I kind of want to know how you do it. But if not, maybe think about growing non-natives in your yard, because especially if you're in the city, if you're like out in the country or you're right up against a nature preserve or something, then by all means be very careful about what species you're introducing and stuff. But one of the things I like for people to think about is every time you're eating this or that thing that's not native, then somewhere out there was a field cleared and turned into agriculture land in order to grow that and then ship it to you. So you're actually protecting more wild spaces by growing those non-native things you're going to eat anyway in your own yard, so that you don't have to then buy into the system where it's being shipped to you from somewhere else that's being cleared in order to grow it. So protecting wild spaces, I'm all for growing natives, absolutely. It does, increase their ability to spread in your area, and it provides wildlife habitat for animals that need it. It's a great idea, but also, I'm not a species purist because of this reason, where I want to protect wild spaces from needing to be clear cut and turned into agricultural land so that I can be fed. I wanted to briefly mention, in different countries, I don't know how this works out, but in the US, for the most part, most areas have wildlife rehabilitators, and for the most part, wildlife rehabilitators are not part of the government in any way. In case, I think a lot of us think of animal control and we think that wildlife rehab falls under that, and it usually doesn't. It's usually an independent, kind of philanthropic organization. Um, so the thing about animals that are caught by cats or dogs, especially cats, is they need to go to a wildlife rehabilitator, even if they look okay. Like, you take it out of your cat's mouth and it looks okay, and you're like, I think it's going to make it, and you let it go. Unfortunately, cat's claws and mouth has Pasteurella bacteria, which kind of works the same way the venom from Gia monsters work, where eventually the animal, especially if it's a small animal like chipmunk bird size, is going to die from it. And it will just kind of be a long, slow death. So it's a good idea to take those animals to a wildlife rehabilitator, because then they can give them an antibiotic before it gets released. And that's just something to keep in mind. And the other thing is to never feed an animal, especially not milk. Cow's milk is a really bad thing for wildlife, but don't feed an animal unless you really know what you're doing, especially baby animals, because it's very easy to cause more damage that way. And rehabbers are constantly getting animals that are near death because the person just thought it was so cute and they wanted to learn to take care of it, and they had very good intentions, but then they fed it, baby cereal because somebody told them to, and it's malnourished and dying by the time they bring it to the rehabber, which is kind of a sad thing for rehabbers, because then they have to keep this animal that is past the point that it could be saved, and it's kind of a thankless task. Um, so Another thing to look at is climate change, and the fact that you may be able to attract wildlife to your yard that you weren't able to do previously. I know that we had never had zebra longwing butterflies in my yard, and then this is my daughter holding up some that we raised, because they landed on our passion flowers, and it was just kind of a freak thing. It was warm that year and they migrated, and we had zebra longwings. I know that we're getting armadillos here, which we did not used to have. So there's sometimes options for attracting wildlife that you wouldn't normally have been able to. Um, so dead wood of any kind is usually good for wildlife gardening. In this case, I'm talking about snags, which is big old dead trees, which might look pretty good in a goth garden. And you can kind of erect your own snags by taking, a big branch that's dead, and then kind of setting it in the ground perhaps, or just sticks, because even smaller things will work, but big ones will attract things like woodpeckers and owls and bats, as really good habitat for them. So it's something to keep in mind, when you have an old tree or something, unless it's going to fall on your house, it might be a good idea to just leave it. Another thing is any place for lizards to sun. These are all three lizards that are common in my area. This is an eastern fence lizard and a five-lined skink and a green anole. It's not green right there, but it can turn green. Um, so any kind of rock piles, big logs, especially if it's south facing, so it absorbs sun, which actually is different if you're in the other hemisphere, but something to keep in mind. A lot of us clean all the rocks out of our yard or all the logs and put them on the road and get rid of them. Snakes are a really fantastic thing to have in the yard, and I know some people don't care for them, but they are a wonderful sign of a healthy ecosystem. And I know that my snakes have really been helping me out by eating all the voles in my hugelkultur beds. I was feeling like I needed to come up with a solution for that, and then I noticed they were just gone. and realized that, we had snake eggs buried in the mulch, and they'd hatched. And then we saw a black rat snake in the backyard a few nights ago, and unfortunately, it actually killed a bird too. But you know, they are part of the ecosystem, and I put up with some of the things that they do that I'm not as excited about, but they do a lot of things that I really do appreciate. I love this little snake right here. That's a ringneck snake, and I discovered the hard way that they will musk you, but they're pretty cool. Let's see. Next. So one of the things that a lot of people get upset about are squirrels, and how do you deal with squirrels in the garden? And accidentally, but am amused by it, took a picture of this squirrel pooping. And this is a squirrel in Brevard. We have a colony of white squirrels about an hour drive from me, and the rumor is that they were from a traveling circus a long time ago, and the circus, uh, I think the animal cage was supposed to have broken, and the squirrels got out, and then there were these white squirrels living there from then on. And these white squirrels are really interesting because they have a charcoal patch right on the top of their head too. But they're pretty famous in Brevard, and there's a few other towns in the U.S. that have them. I know that and this is a type of eastern gray squirrel, but I know the eastern gray squirrels, which you see the babies of here, are they're a problem in countries that imported them, but most people have their own squirrels. And then we have these eastern flying squirrels, and we have chipmunks. And the way that I deal with digging is I put hardware cloth, which you may or may not be able to see that well in this picture, over my beds when I've just put seeds in. And so it's basically a galvanized wire mesh, and the squirrels can't dig through it, and that rescues my seedlings from them. And then before the plants get so big that I can't pull the mesh off without ripping them, I pick it up and then I put some mulch in there, and at that point they have a deep enough root system that even if the squirrels dig a little, it's usually not as much of a problem. Plus, the squirrels are more attracted to the soil that I've just laid bare and kind of made smell interesting than they are soil that has really established roots in it. So I find they don't dig as much in areas that have established plants than they do when you've just put seeds in. So with bats, I'm going to talk about these pretty extensively, but I only have this one slide here of them. So they, in my area and in most of the US, especially on the East Coast, there is white nose syndrome, which is a fungal disease, and they think it may be connected to some of the pesticides that are being sprayed. They think it also may be connected to colony collapse disorder, where the insects are, the honeybees are consuming nectar that's got neonicotinoids and other pesticide and herbicides in them, and so the bees are building it up from consuming that much nectar from the contaminated flowers. And then you have something like bats that eat insects, and so if any of those insects have also been consuming plants and kind of building up a toxicity from that, then the bats are getting an even greater concentration of it because they eat all of these bugs, and then that's, they think, lowering their immune system enough that they're getting this white nose syndrome, which is basically a fungus that takes advantage of their body temperature and pH and stuff. It is just the right growing medium for that fungus. It's not really that it's trying to attack the bats, it's just that, like, hey, you're the kind of thing I want to grow on. But what it's doing is it's kind of clogging up their breathing passages and making them uncomfortable, so it wakes them up and they don't stay in a deep torpor through the winter like they're supposed to. So then they start using up their energy and their fat reserves too fast, and then they'll do things like do winter flights trying to find more insects and die in the snow, and other things that you may have seen with white nose syndrome. And so at the time that I first heard about it, I was doing some help with some local scientists who were researching bats and trying to see if white nose syndrome was spreading in our area, and so we'd go on bat testing trips, and that's what's going on here. We netted a lot of bats, and then we would take a fur sample and check them for white nose syndrome and tag them, and record species and record whether or not they were a female that was lactating, because then we knew they had pups. Um, and It was really interesting, very rewarding to learn about that. But unfortunately, since then, we have actually gotten white nose syndrome in our area, and it's spreading. It spreads extremely quickly, and in the northeast, it's wiped out enormous quantities of bats. And so, building bat houses is a good way to make that a little bit easier on them. To have habitat that maybe will help. And in the warmer areas, there's some thoughts that maybe the bats won't have as much problem with it because they don't need to stay as warm during the winter, plus there's insects throughout the year. So not all the bats are going to disappear from it, but it may take out certain species that have very specific requirements. So it's along the same lines as the monarchs in that way. So trees with cavities, snags, of course, water, and open water too, like ponds and small lakes, because there's a lot of insects that fly over that, and it's a nice, easy, open area that they can swoop through and eat insects over, and plants that attract night insects. So a night garden, a goth night garden, would also be an excellent place to attract insect-eating bats. And so here's an article on the year the monarch didn't appear that was in the New York Times that I strongly recommend reading. And they have a follow-up article here that, even after saying it was already really bad, they had another article saying it was even worse than they thought, and that we really may not have monarchs next year. So there's huge campaigns to grow as much milkweed as we can, and so especially out west it's really important because that's the corridor that they primarily migrate through. If people can plant more milkweed and get other people to plant more milkweed, that's very important. And so there's free milkweed seeds that you can get. They're not a very hard plant to grow. I mean, they are a weed for some people. They're really pretty, though. They're very attractive plants. So it's not like you're planting something really ugly in your yard. So the more of it, the better. And this is something that I highly recommend, some guerrilla gardening, which is when you go out and you plant things on property that does not belong to you without permission. And then we're moving on to some more habitat ideas. Brush piles 101 kind of cracked me up because basically it's just a pile of sticks. And I think they are trying to be humorous with this. But it's important to leave areas for wildlife to live in. This may be a more attractive way if you're just not comfortable with leaving a pile of sticks in your yard. Make it look intentional, because once it looks intentional, all your neighbors will go, "Wow, what are you doing?" instead of, "Oh, they're not cleaning up their yard." And in this case, this is a insect hotel, but the straw right here will attract all sorts of things, and you could fill some of the crevices with piles of sticks. I'm sure snakes would like this as well as insects, as would lizards, and a lot of other animals that would enjoy living in there. And here's another version. You could definitely make one of these look pretty cool and goth. There's a lot of options for structures you could build. You can make a smaller one. I've seen some that are very, very tiny. This one's smaller. And then, in addition to log piles, are rockeries, which is basically a pile of rocks instead of a pile of sticks. And this is the green anole that we have that likes to sun itself, and most lizards do. And then we get to bats, and I included this PDF because it's a really nice one with DNR, South Carolina, and it lists the bat species that we have here, as well as the requirements for actually having a successful bat house, because they've done a lot of studies on which bat houses work. And so it's important to know, bat houses mounted on trees are not as successful, things like that. And then if you want to read through that in more detail, and if you're in the southeast at all of the US, then that'll be relevant to you. If not, then I recommend looking up bat housing for your specific area. And so here is from Bat Conservation the Bat Conservation International. This is a really nice PDF that they have up on bat houses and the studies that they've done on which ones work. And so you can kind of go down here and look at which kinds and sizes had a really nice occupancy rate, because a lot of people will complain. Now, the bat houses became popular in the mid 1990s, and they didn't have any research on what would work. They were just like, bats seem to like this kind of space, so let's build a house that's about like that. And sometimes bat houses would work, but most of the time they didn't, and people would get frustrated with them. So you can look here and look at this BatCon PDF and find out what's more likely to work so that you're not wasting your time and your money. And again, here's certified bat house listings. So if you're going to buy a bat house or a bat house kit, you may want to check it here to see if it's certified for your area. So that you have an idea of, like, these are the ones that they've looked at and gone, yeah, those will work, and you're not just buying something that's going to be unused yard furniture or maybe house a wasp nest at best. And you can even build artificial hollow trees, which, if you can think about that in a goth yard, that could be pretty cool if you made like a really creepy looking old gnarly tree that was artificial and hollow. There's tons of do-it-yourself bat house um, advice on the internet and plans. Again, I would check on that to make sure it's a good one. And then I'm going to end with, this is an article that I wrote on bat white nose syndrome. If you want to check that out, it's got a lot of information on that and what you can do to try to help mitigate it. Which, humans can't do a whole lot, but there are some options. And so I hope that that answers your questions about how to attract bats to the garden as well as other wildlife. Again, I'm recommending that if you live in an area that has different wildlife than what I have here, then you look up specifically for your area. And it's possible you have a government service that could help you with that. So you could give them a call and ask them what they recommend, or you might have some sort of online forum where people discuss that sort of thing. So just, give it a little bit of research, and good luck attracting wildlife to your garden. And if you have any more questions, just let me know in class.